Let's see how to use manual partitioning during Debian installation. I'm going to start by choosing the language, the location, the keyboard. Then we need to provide a host name. We can also provide a domain name. I'm going to leave this one blank. Then we can provide a password for the root user, but personally, usually I prefer to leave this one blank and not provide any root password. This will deactivate the root user and grant sudo privileges to your main user account. So this is going to stay empty, and let's click on continue. I then need to provide the name for the user account. So I'll go with my name, then the username for the new user account. Then we also need to provide the password for this new account, and we can continue. We then need to choose the time zone, and we're now in the partition disks step. So here I'm going to choose manual and continue. And as you can see, on this machine I only have one disk. This is the disk I have, and it received the name SDA. So I need to choose this disk, then click on continue. And it's letting us know that a new partition table will be created for this disk. If I had any partitions on this disk, they would be deleted. I'm fine with that, so I'm going to choose yes and continue. And we can see that the new partition table was created for the disk, but currently it only contains free space. So now we can move on to actually creating the partitions. So we need to click here where it says free space. Then we can start creating the partitions, and the first partition is going to be the EFI system partition. So let's click on continue, and let's create a new partition. And the size for the EFI system partition needs to be at least 500 megabytes. But to be on the safe side, if you have the disk space, it's generally recommended to allocate about 1 gigabyte. So this is what I'm going to do here. So let me allocate 1 gigabyte, then I can click on continue. I want to create the new partition at the beginning of the available space, so let's choose beginning and continue. Then we need to choose use as, and we're going to change this. So I need to click on continue, and here I'm going to choose EFI system partition. So let's continue. And that's it for this partition. So I need to click where it says done setting up this partition, then continue. Next up is going to be the swap partition. So once again, I'm going to click on the free space, then continue to create the new partition. Let's create a new partition. And the amount of swap that you need depends on the amount of RAM that you have on your computer. There is no one definitive answer to the amount of disk space that you need to allocate to your swap partition. But for modern computers that have at least 8 gigabytes of RAM, going with something from about 3 to 5 to maybe 8 gigabytes, somewhere in this range, should be more than enough and should be really sufficient for most people. So it's hard to be very decisive here, but since most computers today have the disk space, I think that this is one of the cases where it's better to be safe than sorry. And my recommendation would be to allocate at least 5 gigabytes, even though some people might say that it's a bit too much. So I am going to allocate, let's say, 5.7 gigabytes. Even if your system is not really going to use all of this disk space for swap, it's not going to hurt. Let's continue. And once again, I'm going to create this partition at the beginning of the available space. So let's continue. Then we need to choose use as and continue. And this is going to be our swap area. So let's choose that. And we are done setting up the partition. So let's choose this option. And now that we have these two, we can move on to actually creating the usable partitions. So once again, I'm going to choose my free space and continue. Let's create a new partition. And this one is going to be the root partition. This is the partition on which the operating system itself will be created, along with all of the system utilities. Now, how much disk space we need to allocate here? So it depends if you want a separate home partition. A lot of Linux users choose to only go with one big partition for both root and home. And if this is the case for you, you need to allocate the rest of the disk space here. This is completely fine. It reduces the amounts of partitions you have and keeps things simple. So only going with one big partition for both root and home is a completely valid option. And if this is what you want, simply leave this as the rest of the disk space and click on continue. But for this demonstration, let's say that I want two separate partitions, one for root, another one for home. So if this is the case for you, you need to choose how much disk space you want for the root partition itself. Now, the amount for this partition needs to be, generally speaking, at least 50 gigabytes. Of course, it can work with much less, but if this is going to be your main computer, then allocating at least 50 gigabytes might be a really good rule of thumb. Moreover, if you're going to use a lot of development tools, maybe a lot of Docker containers, this is the type of things that the system expects to find in the root partition. So if you are going to use this as a development machine, then allocating even more might be a better option. And in this case, you might even want to allocate 100 gigabytes. So this is really something you need to play by ear. But once again, I recommend to allocate at least 50 gigabytes. And for this demonstration, I'm going to allocate 90. So once we are done with that, let's click on continue. And once again, in the beginning, it's going to be used as ext4 journaling file system, and the mount point is going to be / or root. So this is fine. We are done setting up this partition, and let's continue. And now we have this rest of the disk space. This disk space is going to serve as our home partition, and this is where the user files will reside. So let's continue, and let's create a new partition. And for this partition, I am going to allocate the rest of the disk space. So let's continue. And we can see that it is going to be used as ext4 journaling file system. This is fine. And we can see that the mount point is going to be / home. So this is what the system chose for this partition by default. And this is what we want to use this partition for. This is going to be our home partition. So this is fine. So we are done setting up this partition, and let's continue. And we can see that we have at the end of the disk 1 megabyte of free space, which we cannot allocate. This is fine. And this is how it's going to look like. So we have about 1 gigabyte for the EFI system partition, about 3 to 8 gigabytes for swap, and then we have either 1 or 2 partitions for the root and home partitions. These two can be combined, and if this was the case, we wouldn't have the home partition, or they can be in separate 2 partitions, as we can see here. So we have the root partition, whose size needs to be about 50 to 100 gigabytes, and the rest of the disk space for the home partition. So we are done with that. Let's choose Finish Partitioning and write changes to disk and continue. We want to write these changes to the disk, so I'm going to choose Yes and continue. And Debian is now being installed on the computer, and when it's done, it will be ready for use.